In August 1943, the New Guinea front of the U.S. Air Force entered its darkest phase since the Southwest Pacific Campaign began. Over the course of 6 weeks, the P-38 Lightning Force, the pride of American aviation, lost 37 aircraft. Each aircraft lost meant a pilot did not return, a name crossed off the flight roster. Reports from the front lines all recorded the same terse sentence: aircraft within specification. That meant the aircraft was not at fault. That meant the fault lay with the human. According to the 5th Air Force Maintenance Log, August 1943, all aircraft shot down met Lockheed's factory technical standards. But the young men flying them, in their 20s, still fell into the sea or burned up in the jungle. No one at headquarters wanted to question the system. Technical standards were regarded as gospel in the American war industry. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, more than 7,000 miles from the battlefield, continued sending inspection reports regularly to Washington. Control cables, hydraulic pressure, rudder response, all were within tolerance. That system believed that if every screw and every joint met specifications, the aircraft would be flawless. But between theory and the battlefield lay a gap. In New Guinea, humidity exceeded 85%, red dust and sea salt corroded all metals, and soldiers had to fly through dense tropical rain. An inspection procedure in Burbank could not predict what would happen over the skies of the Huon Gulf. According to the U.S. Army Air Force's Field Engineering Report, July 1943, all structural modification requests had to go through a chain of approvals from the maintenance unit to Lockheed's design office, with an average response time of 28 days. During that time, pilots still had to take off in the same troubled aircraft. That management chain functioned like a vast, precise, emotionless bureaucratic machine. It was designed to prevent errors, yet it rendered those on the front lines unable to save themselves. American industrial thinking during World War II was built on a belief: standardization wins wars. Standardization meant strength. A correct design would result in thousands of identical units, easy to replace, easy to train on. Meanwhile, the enemy, Japan, put its faith in the human factor. They trained pilots like combat artisans, believing that personal skill was the key to victory. Two opposing philosophies met in the skies over the Pacific, machine versus man, and in that first encounter, man won. American pilots were taught that the P-38 Lightning could do it all: fly higher, farther, faster. But in real dogfights, they discovered something else. When the Zero banked, the Lightning couldn't react in time. When they pulled the stick, the aircraft lagged by half a second. And in that half second, they were shot down. Orders from command remained unchanged: never turn with a Zero. It was the line repeated in every briefing, drilled until it became reflex. But in a place thousands of miles from command headquarters, the men who touched the metal, heard the cable vibrations, and smelled the engine oil began to realize something was wrong. In that massive system, mechanics were only allowed to maintain, not innovate. Every action had to be logged in maintenance records. Every part had to match its serial number, and every change required the signature of a technical officer. Unauthorized modification was a phrase with the weight of a sentence. The mechanics knew that even a small deviation could get them prosecuted, demoted, or even imprisoned. And so, they chose silence. They followed the procedure, waited for replacement parts, and waited for orders from California. But while they waited, one pilot after another vanished from the sky. Technical Sergeant James McKenna, 32 years old, a mechanic from Long Beach, had spent 8 months at Dobadura Base. He used to work at a small auto repair shop in California, where a mechanic could diagnose issues just by listening to the engine. No technical diagram needed. On the battlefield, McKenna kept his old habits. He listened to the sound of cables, felt the vibration when pulling the rudder. He sensed something hollow in the aircraft's response, a very slight delay, but a clear one. Every time a pilot pulled for a tight turn, the cables didn't transmit force immediately. It was something no checklist recorded, yet it cost pilots their lives. According to the 5th Air Force Loss Analysis, August 1943, Most shootdowns occurred when the P-38 attempted to turn away from a zero. Technical reports noted, control sluggish at low speed. Everything was within limits, not exceeding design specifications. The problem was, those limits were not made for real war. In the chaos of the jungle, where gunfire blended with engine noise, theory no longer applied. And there, James McKenna began to realize that what was right on paper could be wrong in reality. In the evenings, returning from the maintenance area, he walked past the row of fresh graves beyond the runway. The sea breeze carried the smell of burnt oil and wet grass. The wooden headstones bore the names of men he had shaken hands with that morning, now standing silent in the dim moonlight. He stopped and looked at a freshly painted name, Lieutenant David Chen, a perfect P-38, a pilot who followed orders, and an end within standards. McKenna understood. The problem wasn't the men, it was the system, where everything was proven correct until someone died to contradict it. In that moment, one question echoed in his mind, amid the sound of waves and the lingering hum of metal in the night. If the standard is correct and you still die, then is the standard really correct? And in that silence, the war's first crack appeared. When James McKenna began removing the panel beneath the P-38's wing to inspect the control system, he did not expect that the cause of death for dozens of pilots lay within a gap thinner than a finger's width. According to Lockheed's design specifications, the aileron cable system, which ran from the cockpit through the twin booms and looped back to the wing, had a standard slack of 3/8 inch, or approximately 9.5 millimeters. At the factory in Burbank, this margin of error was entirely reasonable, just enough to prevent excessive tension that could wear out the cables. But in a combat environment, where every reaction is measured in fractions of a second, it became an invisible trap. McKenna recalled that when he lightly pulled the cable by hand, the sound it made wasn't taut like a guitar string but a loose twang, like a brake line not fully tightened. According to the AAF Technical Manual 1943, that amount of slack was acceptable as it fell within mechanical safety limits. But in wartime, that safety limit costs lives. The impact of 3/8 inch was not an abstract figure. It translated into a 0.3 second delay in control response. In U.S. Air Force flight simulations at the time, the P-38 was classified as having heavy control response at low speed, meaning it was sluggish when maneuvering at low altitude. At speeds of 200 and 300 miles per hour, a delay of 0.3 seconds equated to more than 40 meters of flight distance, enough for a Japanese fighter to cut in and gain a firing position. According to the 5th Air Force Flight Evaluation, August 1943, the average encounter between a Lightning and a Zero took place within a turning radius of only 300 meters. A small margin of error in maneuvering could determine life or death. On paper, the P-38 was a symbol of American engineering power. Two Allison V, 1,710 engines, 1,425 horsepower each, top speed of 400 miles per hour, range of 1,300 miles. But when diving into tight turns at low altitude, its 7,900 kilograms weight turned it into a sluggish block of metal, while the Mitsubishi A6M0, weighing only 2,700 kilograms, could complete a full turn in 12 seconds. The P-38 needed twice that time. This turned every dogfight between the two aircraft into a chess game with a pre-written outcome. According to the 5th Air Force Tactical Report, July 1943, the Zero could complete a horizontal turn in half the time of the Lightning, and from a 15-degree offset angle, it needed only 3 seconds to bring its opponent into firing range. McKenna had witnessed this pattern repeat many times. On the 9th of July 1943, Lieutenant David Chen, a young pilot from Sacramento, took off on a foggy morning. He was attacked while attempting to perform a turn to evade the enemy. According to the report, Chen attempted a defensive role, but aircraft response was delayed. When his comrades found him, only the charred wreckage of the plane remained in the forest. 3 weeks later, on the 3rd of August 1943, Captain William Morrison, a seasoned pilot with 11 kills, was shot down while trying to reverse course at 12,000 feet. McKenna's mechanic friend, Rodriguez, inspected the wreckage and noted in the maintenance log, "Control cable tension within spec." The specs were correct, the procedures were followed, and another man was lost. By the 14th of August 1943, Lieutenant Thomas Parker, a training classmate of Hayes, was being chased by two Zeros. He called out over the radio, his voice urgent, "She's too slow on the stick." Then the signal vanished. McKenna was standing on the runway, hearing those calls over the maintenance room radio. He knew exactly what had happened. A delay, a slower motion, and the Zero's 20mm cannon shell had found its mark before the P-38 could complete its turn. All three incidents were concluded with the same finding: pilot error. Investigating officers affirmed that the fault lay in the flying technique. No one suspected that the issue came from the cable system. McKenna wrote in his notebook, "They died by specification." According to the AAF Maintenance Review Board, August 1943, no recommendations were approved regarding changes to cable tension. The phrase, "within Lockheed specs," became the system's shield. It protected procedures, but abandoned people. Those working in the maintenance hangars at Dobodura began referring to the phenomenon as the lag. They heard pilots complain, "The lightning feels heavy on turns." They inspected, retightened bolts, and applied grease, but everything was perfect. McKenna said that when he placed his hand on the cable, it felt like touching a rubber band, not wrong, but not right enough to save a life. In a 1991 interview recording, he recounted, "You could hear it sing when it was loose. The sound told you something paper couldn't. That sound, what paperwork could never hear, was something he remembered for the rest of his life." Each time he filed a report on aileron lag, McKenna sent it to the technical department, and the reply was always the same: within Lockheed specifications. The system wasn't wrong, so no one needed to fix it. The average response time was 28 days, but each passing day meant another P-38 not returning. In the hot, humid atmosphere of the aircraft hangar, with hammering sounds echoing between the crashing waves of the bay, McKenna looked up at the clouded sky. He understood that what killed people wasn't the enemy ahead, it was the tiny space between two cable ends, 3/8 inch separating theory from reality. According to the 5th Air Force Loss Summary, August 1943, 70% of P-38 seconds were shot down during dogfights at speeds below 250 miles per hour. That figure aligned with the point at which cable lag became most pronounced. Each new statistic was further proof that absolute precision in technical manuals was concealing a fatal flaw in war. In the small room at the back of the hangar, McKenna placed the draft report on the table, the oil lamp casting light on his sun-worn face. He wrote the final line, ink bleeding softly across the paper: "Problem not mechanical, problem systemic." Then he closed the notebook. Outside, the P-38 seconds continued to take off, carrying with them an error so small no one noticed, an error big enough to change the entire outcome of the sky. On the night of the 16th of August 1943, Dobodura base was soaked in humidity and the smell of burnt oil. The generator from the engineering zone still rumbled steadily like the heartbeat of war. It was past 23, and everyone had returned to their tents. In the maintenance hangar, only yellow flickering lights remained, and the shadow of one man bent beneath the wing of a P-38 Lightning. It was Technical Sergeant James McKenna, the mechanic, who had been sleepless for weeks because of a question without an answer. Why did perfect aircraft still lead pilots to their deaths? He opened the metal panel and looked into the control cable system he had checked hundreds of times. The cable was shiny, straight, within standard, but he knew it killed people. On the table, next to the toolbox, lay a 6-inch piece of piano wire he had taken from the wreckage of a damaged P-38. The wire was made of high-tensile steel, used for the trim rudder system. He used pliers to bend it into a Z shape, lightly twisting both ends to create elasticity. His aim was to increase the tension by 0.4 pounds, equivalent to 0.18 kilograms, enough to eliminate the 3/8 inch slack allowed by Lockheed standards. According to AAF Technical Manual number 0175EB1 1943, modifying control structures without engineering orders was considered an unauthorized modification, a criminal act. If discovered, the punishment could be court-martial and dishonorable discharge. McKenna understood this better than anyone, but as he placed his hand on the wire, remembering the faces now buried in the jungle, the fear disappeared. The metal cooled under his fingers, and the sound of cutting pliers cracked through the night. McKenna wiped the sweat from his forehead, carefully threading the wire through the pulley assembly and tightening it. Every movement had to be precise, as even a slight misalignment could jam or snap the cable mid-flight. According to the field maintenance log, Dobadura, August 1943, this procedure took about 8 minutes if done correctly, but he took nearly twice as long because his hands were shaking and the light was dim. In that moment, McKenna was doing what the entire system dared not, correcting the failure of the standard. He called it a moral adjustment. And, when he finished, he pulled the cable for a test. The sound was completely different, taut, sharp, decisive. McKenna stood still, listening to that note blending into the ocean wind. He knew he had just crossed the line between following orders and saving lives. In a 1991 interview, he recalled, "We were trained to keep the airplane safe, but I wanted to keep the man alive." He didn't see it as a heroic act, just something that had to be done. That was the moment he realized engineering was not just numbers, but ethics, a choice between rules and human life. Before leaving the hangar, McKenna scribbled a vague note into the maintenance log, adjusted cable tension, within tolerance. No one would notice. He washed his hands with cold water, wiped the blood from his thumb cut by the pliers. When he stepped outside, the clock showed 1:15. The night sky was heavy, clouds drifting low, distant sounds of patrol aircraft in the air. He walked along the runway, listening to the crunch of gravel underfoot, feeling like he had just dropped a stone into the still pond of the military. From now on, that pond would ripple. The next morning, sunlight filtered through thin clouds. McKenna returned to the hangar and saw a young pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, walking toward the freshly serviced Lightning. Hayes was 23 years old, from Iowa, with only 6 missions, and had never shot down a target. He always followed orders strictly, executed every maneuver by the book: dive, fire, disengage. But every time he returned, his face looked haunted, like a man who had narrowly escaped death. In the flight log, the line "no kills" kept repeating after every mission. That morning, Hayes approached and said quietly but firmly, "Sergeant, is there any way to make it respond faster?" McKenna looked into his young eyes and saw the faces of the fallen Chen, Morrison, Parker. He knew that if he stayed silent, Hayes might be next. "I'll take another look," he said, then bent down for a final check. The cable was tight. The metals sound perfect. No one else knew that aircraft carried an unauthorized change, a live experiment. As Hayes's P-38 rolled onto the runway, McKenna stood at the edge of the field, cap pulled low, gripping his logbook tightly. The twin Allison engines roared, 2 white trails stretching behind. He watched the metal reflect the sunlight, glinting across the wing like a blade slashing the sky. According to the 475th Fighter Group Operations Record, 17 August 1943, at 7:42, Hayes took off with his squadron, heading for the skies over the Huon Gulf. For the next 17 minutes, McKenna would not know if he had saved a man or killed him with his own invention. He walked around the hangar, looking at the empty frames. In his mind, every sound echoed: the snap of the pliers, the hum of the cable, the stern warning from his superiors, "Don't touch the control system without authorization." McKenna sighed. He knew he had committed a crime, but it was a justified one. A crime his conscience was willing to bear, because it might trade for a real life. In the stillness of a Pacific morning, the old mechanic bowed his head in prayer, not for himself, but for the man up there, where metal, wind, and his decision were about to meet. And in that moment, somewhere between fear and faith, war waited for its proof. On the morning of the 17th of August 1943, the fog had not yet lifted from the runway at Dobodura. Droplets of moisture clung to the aluminum wings of the P-38 Lightning Squadron, reflecting the early sunlight. At 7:42, Lumtentis, Robert Hayes started up the twin Allison V1710 engines, the roar of the two propellers waking the entire base. McKenna stood at the edge of the tarmac, eyes fixed on the accelerating aircraft. He said nothing. Beneath the gleaming metal skin was a 6-inch Z-shaped piano wire, increasing cable tension by 0.4 pounds, something no one in the Air Force knew existed. It was his secret, and Hayes's fate was tied to it. At 8:14, the Lightning Squadron engaged the enemy over the skies of Huon Gulf, at an altitude of 13,000 feet. According to the 475th Fighter Group Combat Report, 17 August 1943, a group of 18 Mitsubishi A-6M0s from the Japanese Navy was spotted flying in two V-shaped formations. Hayes flew in position number 3, on the right side of the formation. As the American squadron dove from the direction of the sun, the light gleamed off the silver aircraft bodies, turning the entire sky into a fiery metal grid. Radio chatter erupted, mixed with the sound of wind howling past the cockpit glass. Hayes locked onto a target, pulled the stick, and the P-38 dove at 380 miles per hour. At that moment, he did not yet know the aircraft's control response had changed. When the first Zero veered sharply to the right, Hayes turned the stick by reflex. Instead of lagging by half a beat as usual, the plane instantly banked 90 degrees in one continuous motion, twice as fast as Lockheed's test standard. Hayes could hardly believe the sensation. "It felt like the airplane read my mind," he wrote in his after-action report. The aim was stable. All four, 50 caliber machine guns and the 20mm cannon fired in unison. Within 3 seconds, the final bullet tore through the Zero's cockpit, turning the Japanese aircraft into a fireball, plunging into the sea. The shot was so precise that a squadmate exclaimed over the radio, "Good hit, Robert!" But the battle wasn't over. 2 more Zeros dove from behind, trying to cut across his path. Hayes yanked the stick hard, feeling the G-force press down on his body. The P-38 turned like a silver streak, slicing through the air. For the first time, the Lightning could turn with a 0. The directional reversal took less than 2 seconds, so fast that ground radar couldn't register the vector change in time. Hayes brought the nose perfectly into the enemy's flight path and squeezed the trigger. The cannon shells streamed straight into the center of the formation. 1 Zero caught fire, its wing ripping from the fuselage in a brilliant explosion. In just 30 seconds, Hayes had downed 3 Japanese aircraft without taking a single hit. According to the 5th Air Force After-Action Summary, August 1943, the entire battle lasted 7 minutes. The U.S. squadron lost 0 aircraft. The Japanese lost 5 Zeros, 3 confirmed by Hayes. The survival rate was so high that intelligence officers doubted the data. On paper, it was impossible under standard P-38 maneuver limits. But that impossibility had just happened in plain view of dozens of pilots. At 15,000 feet, Captain Frank Mitchell of the 475th Fighter Group was a witness. He observed the fight from a distance through binoculars. In his report to U.S. Air Force Command, he wrote, "Hayes's Lightning moved as if its weight had been cut in half. Mitchell had flown over 80 missions, knew the aircraft's limits, but had never seen a P-38 reverse direction that quickly." On the ground, Jilly radar recorded the Lightning's unusual turns, with oscillation amplitudes 1.8 times the norm. Technical officers labelled it an abnormal roll rate. No one could explain it, but everyone saw the result. After downing the 3 targets, Hayes pulled the aircraft back to a safe altitude and scanned the area. On the radio, his voice trembled from adrenaline. 3 down, returning to base. At 9:03, he landed at Dobodura, engines still glowing hot. McKenna was already waiting by the runway. When Hayes stepped out, his flight collar soaked in sweat, his eyes lit up, disbelief written across his face. He walked over, placed a hand on McKenna's shoulder, and said 2 words. It worked. According to the 475th FG Daily Maintenance Report, 17 August 1943, Hayes's P-38, serial number 42 to 12608, was noted with no mechanical issues, but had one handwritten line added, "Exceptional control response." That phrase would later become the first recorded sign that an out-of-spec technical alteration had begun. That same afternoon, Captain Mitchell found McKenna at the hangar. The door was slightly ajar, sunlight cutting through oil-laced dust in a dim yellow streak. He asked directly, "What did you do to his airplane?" McKenna looked at him, silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Something that wasn't allowed." Mitchell nodded. "Then do it again." 2 men, 1 pilot, 1 mechanic understood they had just crossed the boundary of official orders. And in that moment, a small idea began to spread not through documents or commands, but through the belief shared by those who had seen the impossible become real. On the way back to camp, McKenna heard the surf pounding the sand. In the distance, the echo of anti-aircraft fire still rolled in from the sea. But in his mind, there was only the sound of the wire humming from the night before. That wire had brought 1 man home and could save many more. He did not yet know that from that morning onward, the system Thahad had once been killed by specification would have to bow before an anonymous act. According to the 5th Air Force War Diary, August 1943, after the Huon Gulf battle, the P-38's kill rate in the area increased by 35% in just 1 week. No one knew why. No technical directive had changed. But among the hundreds of dry reports, one single line made people stop and read, "Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 3 confirmed kills in 7 minutes." And in that silence of disbelief, the rules of air combat broke. After the Battle of Huon Gulf, rumours about Lieutenant Robert Hayes's P-38 spread like electricity through the invisible wires of Dobodura Base. Pilots returning to the barracks kept talking about how the lightning rolled twice as fast as normal. In the command room, Captain Frank Mitchell quietly observed the combat report's numbers that didn't make sense. According to the 475th Fighter Group Combat Report, 17 August 1943, Hayes shot down 30 aircraft in 7 minutes, while not a single P-38 was damaged. That event broke every previous statistic. Mitchell, a meticulous and skeptical man by nature, went to the maintenance area. He asked McKenna one blunt question: "What did you do to that airplane?" McKenna replied briefly, "Something you won't find in the manual." That evening, Mitchell returned with his wingman. He asked McKenna to repeat exactly what had been done to Hayes's aircraft. The two of them sat beside the wing of P-38 serial number 42 to 12297, the oil lamp flickering against the Z-shaped piece of piano wire. McKenna carefully threaded it into the cable junction, adding 0.4 pounds of tension as before. No authorization, no report, no certification. But the next morning, when Mitchell took off, he felt the difference from the first touch of the control stick. As he later recounted in the post-war pilot interview, 1961, the lightning rolled like a Spitfire, not a heavy twin boom. He landed, stepped off the plane, and said briefly to McKenna, "Do it for the rest." By 20 August 1943, McKenna had modified 9 P-38 seconds, all belonging to Mitchell's squadron. Other mechanics began to notice. They saw that the planes flown by Hayes and Mitchell rolled more smoothly, turned more quickly. A mechanic named Rodriguez, an old friend of McKenna, asked for the secret. McKenna simply gestured for silence, then opened a small panel on the left wing. In the dim light, he showed him the small metal piece fixed between the cables. "It's nothing new," he said, "just a better way to listen to the airplane. It took only 8 minutes to install, and only one person was brave enough to believe the change was worth it." By late August, maintenance hangars across New Guinea began showing the same modification. Young mechanics whispered to each other in the base mess halls, tracing Z-shapes onto tabletops with coffee spoons. They didn't dare write anything down, but everyone understood. According to the 49th Fighter Group Engineering Note, September 1943, at least 40 P-38 seconds in New Guinea had been unofficially adjusted. Whenever inspectors from higher command arrived, those piano wire pieces were removed, stored in cloth pouches, and reinstalled only after they left. In the technical logs, the same lines repeated: cable tension, normal, no one was caught, no reports were filed. That underground network ran as smoothly as the very machines it fixed. The spread happened in ways no one expected. A pilot from the 49th Fighter Group, after being transferred to Dobodura, told the maintenance crew at Gusap about the lightning that didn't lag in turns anymore. The mechanics there listened, then tried to replicate it from memory. The first aircraft worked perfectly. Within 2 weeks, the whole unit had adopted the modification. By the time mid-level engineers noticed discrepancies in control response reports, it was too late to stop. According to the USAAF Field Engineering Memo, September 1943, no one could explain why so many aircraft had identical test results yet showed improved roll performance. The numbers proved the difference. Tactical statistics from the 5th Air Force Comparative Combat Summary showed that in July, the P-38s kill ratio was 1-2, losing 2 lightnings for every 0 shot down. In August, the ratio rose to 1, 3-1. By September, it had balanced at 1-1. In squadrons with the modification, survival rates were over 30% higher than those without. Pilots described the lightning as having a soul of its own, understanding the pilot's hand. A mid-level technical officer at Port Moresby Base admitted in an internal report, "There's something different about the airplanes from Dobodura, but I can't find it." McKenna never claimed any credit. He simply kept working in silence, showing each young mechanic how to bend the wire, how to listen for the vibration in the cable. When someone asked why it had to be done, he said, "Because paper doesn't fly, men do." That phrase spread like a silent motto. By the end of September, the crews at Nadzab, Gusap, and Leh all knew the Dobodura way. They didn't write it down, didn't report it, but the results were visible in every mission that returned. According to the AAF Maintenance Overview, October 1943, senior engineers began noticing inconsistent readings when measuring control cable tension. One inspector wrote, "Some aircraft feel tighter than factory specs, yet pass inspection." They didn't know that just hours before the inspection team arrived, the tensioners had been neatly removed and placed in toolboxes. When the team left, those metal pieces returned to their old positions, silently continuing their rebellion. No orders were given, no commands issued. Everything ran on trust, on the memory of those who had lost friends in smoke and fire. Every Z-shaped piano wire was a small act of resistance against the vast administrative machine, and like any movement born of desperation, it grew in the shadows, with no name, no symbol. According to post-war estimates in the USAAF Pacific Analysis, 1,946, a total of over 120 P-38 seconds in the Southwest Pacific had been fitted with improvised tensioners before the official upgrade was introduced. Not a single mechanic was credited. But everyone knew every time a lightning rolled quicker, escaped an ambush, and returned, that was proof their network was still alive. An old engineer recounted at a 1,982 veterans reunion, "We called it the 8-minute miracle." Indeed, just 8 minutes of work, a small wire segment, had helped change the direction of the war. Not because of orders from Washington, but because of oil-stained hands in a small hangar deep in the jungle. And somewhere between silence and defiance, a nameless network kept the sky alive. As the New Guinea front entered the final days of August 1943, the first signs of change began to appear in Japanese reports. Pilots of the 11th Air Fleet noted something unusual about their familiar opponent, the P-38 Lightning. According to the 11th Air Fleet Intelligence Report, 28 August 1943, multiple pilots reported that American Lightnings now reverse faster, unpredictable. That comment appeared repeatedly across various after-action reports, from Rabaul, Wewak to Leh, all confirming the same phenomenon. An aircraft once heavy and predictable had suddenly become agile and elusive. In Japanese training, pilots were taught that the Lightning was slow to enter turns and easy to trap from the rear if pressured. But when they applied those familiar tactics, everything had changed. According to the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Evaluation, August 1943, a pilot named Lieutenant Hiroshi Naito recounted that in an engagement on 26 August 1943, his Zero was outmaneuvered by a P-38 within seconds. Naito wrote, "I turned inside the Lightning, as trained, but it followed my movement instantly. I had to dive to survive." Reports like these led the Japanese command to initiate a tactical review, as the methods that had once given them an edge were no longer effective. The P-38's turn rate and rolling ability became an unknown variable, causing Zero pilots to lose the confidence that had allowed them to dominate the skies for 2 years. On 3 September 1943, that doubt reached its peak. Over the skies of Wewak, one of Japan's legendary pilots, Saburo Sakai, credited with 64 kills, encountered a group of P-38 seconds. According to the Sakai combat log, September 1943, he used his usual tactic, bait the opponent into a tight turn, then suddenly reverse direction to cut inside. He had used this method to shoot down many American pilots, but when he executed the reversal, the Lightning ahead turned at the same speed. Both aircraft lunged into a head-on crossing maneuver, nearly colliding. Sakai had to roll his aircraft onto its back, losing nearly 2,000 feet in altitude to avoid the crash. When he regained stability, the enemy was already gone from view. In his post-battle diary, Sakai wrote, "I fought a different kind of Lightning. It reacted too quickly, almost as if it anticipated my move." It was the first time he admitted that the Zero no longer held the initiative in dogfights. According to the Imperial Navy Air Combat Debrief, September 1943, Sakai returned to the Wewak base in silence. When asked about the encounter, he only said, "The sky has changed." Pilots who once took pride in the Zero's maneuverability began to question their own skill. At the same time, reports from the 5th Air Force Operations Record, September 1943, showed a clear shift in the loss ratio. Throughout the month, P-38 Lightnings downed 38 Zeros while losing 22 aircraft. Just 2 months earlier, those numbers were reversed in July. The Americans had lost 2 P-38 seconds for every Zero they shot down. The sudden disparity surprised Pacific Command, but no one had an explanation. Technical officers still insisted there was no major design modification recorded. In reality, a small 6-inch metal change had redrawn the victory curve. According to the Combined Fleet Tactical Bulletin, 18 September 1943, Japanese pilots began describing their opponents with a tone of concern. The Americans' twin-engine fighters are rolling faster, entering turns quicker, and escaping traps. The report clearly stated that the cornering tactic, once the Zero's most powerful weapon, now failed in over 60% of combat engagements. Unit commanders in the 11th Air Fleet called for a strategic review. An emergency meeting at Rabaul on 21 September 1943 ended with a short directive circulated throughout the region. Avoid engaging P-38 unless numerical advantage is clear. That order, according to many post-war documents, marked the end of the era where the Zero ruled the skies over the Pacific. From the hunter, the Zero became prey. Japanese pilots, once praised as the elite of aerial combat doctrine, now had to steer clear of an aircraft they had once dismissed. According to the 11th Air Fleet War Diary, September 1943, the number of pilot reports stating could not outturn the Lightning tripled compared to the previous month. Hastily written diary entries from field bases revealed a growing fear as the master of tight turn tactics was outdone by an opponent's nearly invisible change. While the Japanese scrambled to find the cause, the Americans still didn't fully understand why the P-38's survival rate had suddenly improved. No report mentioned any mechanical enhancement. In official summaries, the victories were attributed to improved pilot coordination and weather advantage. In truth, that improvement came from a small steel wire bent in the night in a remote workshop in New Guinea. A solitary, unauthorized act had shaken the combat doctrine of an entire empire. After the war, when historians reviewed the Imperial Navy Air Staff reports from 1943, they noticed the language had shifted. Instead of superior maneuverability, the notes began describing the P-38 with the word unexpected. That word appeared more than 40 times throughout September. Confidence had vanished, leaving only doubt and fatigue. Pilots who once praised the Zero as an extension of their body now felt it had betrayed them not due to design flaws, but because their opponent had evolved. On a night in late September, at the Wewak airfield, Sakai stared at a sky thick with smoke. A young officer asked him, "Why do you think they changed so fast?" He remained silent, then replied in a weary voice, "Maybe because they listened to the sound of their own planes." On the other side of the ocean, McKenna would never know that the enemy had sensed the very sound he once heard when pulling the cable, a small sound, yet one that shifted the entire sky. And in that silence above the Pacific, the hunter became the hunted. When the first seasonal rains fell on New Guinea in October 1943, the Dobodura base was no longer as noisy as in previous months. The P-38 squadron of the 475th Fighter Group had regained control of the skies, and the survival rate had clearly increased. But amid the celebration, a group of engineers from the AAF Technical Command noticed something strange. According to the AAF Maintenance Audit, October 1943, inspection reports on control cables recorded inconsistent cable tension readings. The tension in many aircraft was higher than factory specifications. They assumed it was a measurement tool error. However, the pattern appeared in all aircraft returning from Dobodura, making the phenomenon more than a coincidence. An officer wrote in the report, "There is a field-level modification we cannot identify." It was the first time the massive bureaucracy of the US Air Force began to sense the scent of a technical rebellion. In November 1943, Lockheed sent a team of engineers to New Guinea to investigate. They removed every aircraft panel, measured every cable section, and took detailed notes. When they found the Z-shaped piece of metal inside the wing, the entire group fell silent. An engineer named John Decker wrote in the internal report, "It was simple, elegant, and worked perfectly. They tested it, flew it, and then measured the aircraft's control response speed. The results showed the plane could roll 35% faster, reducing average delay to 0.15 seconds, nearly matching the effectiveness of a professionally engineered design upgrade." In the summary report sent back to the US, Lockheed concluded, "Safe and effective, should have been original design." That was how they admitted their mistake while keeping the name of the person who discovered it hidden. According to the Lockheed production memo, December 1943, starting with the P-38 Jules variant, the tension mechanism was officially integrated into the control cable system. This mechanism was called the Integrated Tension Compensator. It became a standard component on the production line, applied to hundreds of aircraft manufactured afterward. In the technical documentation, the annotation read, "Design improvement derived from field performance analysis." There was no mention of James McKenna or the Dobodura modification. When the war shifted to Europe, those improved lightnings flew in Italy, France, and Germany. Every time they twisted through smoke and gunfire with quicker response, it was the pulse of a small wire bent on a rainy tropical night. After the war, McKenna returned to California. He was discharged in 1946 and 2 years later opened a small garage in Long Beach. The weathered hand-painted sign read, "McKenna Auto Service. Honest work, fair price." He worked quietly, fixing cars for locals, never speaking of the past. In 1991, an aviation historian named Dr. Alan Webster found a copy of the 11th Air Fleet Intelligence 1943 report, which mentioned the phenomenon of unusually responsive P-38 seconds. Webster followed the trail and found McKenna at age 73, still working part-time in his garage. When asked about the modification, he just smiled. It wasn't genius, it was necessity. According to estimates in the study USAAF Field Modifications Review 1,991, the total number of pilots saved thanks to the tensioner system ranged from 80 to 100. That number may be small compared to the scale of the war, but it is enough to prove that a right action, even if against the rules, can change the fate of an entire squadron. McKenna passed away in 2006 at the age of 88. In his obituary, the family simply wrote, James McKenna, World War II, veteran and mechanic. No medals, no honours, but at the Marchfield Air Museum, a replica of the Dobadura tensioner design is still on display, with no author's name. Under yellow light, that slender metal wire lies silently in a glass case, a humble witness to the war known as the War of Details. Oh, according to the Post-War Engineering Ethics Conference 1978, Lockheed engineers later admitted that the lesson from New Guinea changed the thinking of the entire industry. One elderly engineer said, "War taught us that specifications save machines, but listening saves lives." That quote was entered into the technical archive as a new moral declaration for military aviation. The lessons drawn from McKenna's story became the opening chapter in maintenance training manuals at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for decades afterward. Later, historians would call it one of the most beneficial procedural violations in U.S. Air Force history. From a technical perspective, it was proof of the system's adaptability when challenged from within. From a human perspective, it was the act of a mechanic choosing life over rules. McKenna didn't break discipline, he redefined its meaning. Industrial war was not only a race for production, but an ethical test for those behind the blueprints. Among thousands of mechanical details, there was one slender wire that reminded humanity that standards are not always right. When everything is measured in numbers, sometimes courage is the unquantifiable variable. That piano wire did not just save pilots, it saved the very idea of humanity in engineering. And somewhere in the silence of a workshop, a thin wire still hums a reminder that morality too needs tension to stay alive.